drives me crazy. It really does. Yeah. They should all be T25s. And the one that really drives me nuts is when they're T20s and you load up your pals with them and you can't tell, and then you get to where you're going and try and put that green bit in there and it doesn't fit. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion about building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Technical Editor Mark Peterson.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Contributing Editor Ian Schwant.
Hello.
And Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Great to see you guys. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing great.
So should we tell folks that we tried to do this earlier in the week and you had a computer snafu, Ian? What the heck was going on?
Yeah, it was an epic fail. My my work computer, I don't know if it was ready to burst into flames, and that's why it just shut itself down and refused to come back. But that computer is officially being recycled by its maker. It's returning to the source so that it can be taken apart, hopefully economically and environmentally friendly.
So does Apple send these to a beach in some developing nation to have them disassembled and the parts reclaimed?
I'm sure somewhere there's a picture of just stacks of MacBooks sitting somewhere.
Stacks of Macs.
With a very young person taking them apart, unfortunately.
So are you up and running again? I'm guessing you are.
I'm on a spare that we had kicking around the office from a past employee, and I'm supposed to take delivery of my new machine later today.
How's the shop building coming? Any work on that?
The barn?
Yeah.
It got its final inspection, so that's all finished up and done. I made up all my window pieces. I'm just doing like barn sashes that I'll cut into the side and just screw into a rough opening over the base of the metal. So I've got those all made up, and we'll see if I can find any time to start on that project this weekend or not.
So I'm sure most of the folks who listen to the show are familiar with like a CO inspection, right? Like what is there for a barn that, what is your inspector looking for?
I'm pretty sure he was just looking to see that it was complete so that they can raise my property tax assessment.
I thought that might be it.
And actually, yeah, go ahead.
We got our greenhouse was under the same building permit. We just did like an outbuilding permit, so I'd only have to pay for it once. And we got a very nice letter from our tax assessor telling me that our property value had gone up $1,500 because of that greenhouse. So I can imagine.
So out of pocket for you, $1,500 a year extra?
No, the value of the property. So
Okay,
whatever
gotcha.
that translates to,
Sure.
like $10.
What does that
taxes
translate to an hourly wage for you?
I'm not sure if it would look like an hourly wage. It might look like what you would pay for a bad cup of gas station coffee.
So what is your barn? What's your use for it? What size is it? And what are you is it a workshop or storage or what is it?
So it's a 54 by 36 barn. And right now It's just going to store farm equipment. We are going to wire it up for a future shop along the backside, and it'll just become like a shed mahal when we're no longer actively farming. Then I'll just turn it into, fun zone, put a golf simulator in there. I've joked on here that I have to have it sort of set up for an apartment for when Sarah gets the good sense to boot me out of the house. I've got somewhere to go.
Well, you asked Patrick what they're looking for, and that is actually one of the things that they're looking for is that you're not turning this into a second dwelling.
Correct.
Because that can be, especially in quasi-rural areas.
Who would know, right? Who would know?
And it's common for people to, throw an apartment out there. And so if they see things like, a little extra plumbing here that looks like a bathroom or looks like, so it can be a big deal.
Yeah, that's why you get all of the other permitted projects on your property complete, and then you fall back and turn that
Right.
into
Then
an
you turn the
apartment
living space, yes.
to give them no reason to come back to your property.
Yeah. I had built a shop at my last property. I wanted to put a live-in trusses on part of it, to have an office up there. And they absolutely wouldn't let me. And in this county I was living in at the time, they were having problems with farmers housing migrant workers, in just kind of horrible situations. So he said, you know what, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. You ain't getting an office.
Under what authority can they say you can't do that, Mark?
Because it says right in there, only one residence per, per.
I know, but an attic is not a residence. I don't understand.
It's one of those things where it could have been. I mean, it would have been an office, and I wanted to put a little bathroom in there so that tied into the septic, and that, that was just.
That's what did it right there.
That did it. Yep.
You just got to have the permanent porta-john out next to it for you to use when you're in your office.
But so right now this is my temporary office in my house, but my office will be in my shop, and they didn't question it down here. I've got a separate bathroom. It's already plumbed, and the water's out there. The septic's hooked up. So
they're like, we need more tax-paying residents, is what they're saying, right?
Yeah. Well, even the mother-in-law suite here, although it's still attached to the building, I think if I recall, that's why I did that, because it's. It's the house, the garage, and then the mother-in-law suite. So it is, it's really two totally different dwellings, but it's all connected to the same. And they didn't have a problem with that either. So that's good.
When we tried to do this last time, Ian mentioned, Mark, that he was interested in hearing about your house. What question did you have specifically, Ian?
I just wanted to hear how it went. And I think the barn dominium thing has been a hot topic on here. And over the years, and that's kind of what you did, right? If I remember correctly.
I lived and it was kind of by accident, but we talked about this too, so I won't dwell on it. But yeah, I lived in the barn for a while, and it was horrible, but a lifesaver to have it right across the street and have a place that I could just walk across the street to get my tools or things like that. So it worked out well. It's right now the house is we're in it, it's livable, but there's just a lot of projects that need to be done, sidewalks and aprons and entries and pavilion or pergolas and that sort of thing. So that's it's an ongoing saga, Ian. I really do look at my day as half the day I do, sit at my desk and try to make money, and the other day I'm trying to finish the house. So it's
good
great.
to know that you and I are both limping to the same finish line.
Well, for me, it was honestly, a lot of financial. The cost overrun on this were just, it was just unreal how, 400% on some of these things I had to buy.
Yeah, no, I had the same thing, and it's been difficult for us to think about, okay, what do we want to do this year? Do we want to focus more on exterior stuff? I'd love to build the lower deck outside of our exposed basement area. But you start pricing it out, and we could do it out of the cheapest PT stuff for $1,500. Is that really what we want to do?
And that's the thing, yeah.
How long is that going to take? We've gotten to where we measure things in weekends now. So every project is how many weekends is this? Because we're done lying to ourselves about doing work when we get home from work. Yeah. So it's like, oh, that's a 4-weekend project next fall.
It is, yeah. And for me, I budget out. I have a certain budget per month of what I can spend. So sometimes it's, I'm starting this project, and I'll go way over on the budget, which is pretty much every month. I go way over on the budget, and then the next month it's all right. There's always things to do that take a lot of time but don't cost as much. So
that's when you start mowing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah,
you've been working on. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That you've been working on your in-law entryway. It looks
deck.
Like, right?
Yeah, just a little back deck patio. It was one of those things where it's kind of just a glorified stairs. Really, there's only enough room for it. One little table and one, maybe chair for 2 people. So it's going to come down. It comes down onto a larger patio that'll be kind of surrounding it. So that's a next year. That's a next year plan. But where that deck sits, actually, there's about 6 feet of 6 feet of fill underneath, so it'll be interesting to see. And I purposely didn't put gutters up for a while, and I purposely been kind of holding off on doing that because it'll be interesting to see how that settles. And in that photo, there's a little 10-inch tube there, or 8-inch tube, but underneath it, it's a big 16-inch footing under there, as wide, that you can't see underground. So we'll see how that settles, and if it really starts to settle, which isn't a big deal. Like in the stairs where they're at, that's kind of a temporary. You can see there's block under the stairs.
You have that cribbed up, I'm guessing, because patio is going to go under that ultimately. Am I right?
Yeah, I won't. The patio will go under the stairs, but it won't go all the way under the deck. I'll just leave that rock.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of it's patio. In the deck, decks are. I have a love-hate relationship with. I like to sit on them, but sometimes I drive by houses, and they're beautiful deck, but it looks like somebody built a tree house on the side of a house. It really doesn't match the rest of the house. So I tried to make it kind of as minimalist as I can. And
it's
then
beautiful. You have PVC skirt boards and risers on your stairs, and you have a PVC. It looks like decorative board over your frame.
Yeah, and for the railings, it's not high enough where I actually need by code to have railings, but I don't want people falling off it because it's going to be
Especially your
concrete
mom-in-law.
Yes, so I'm just going to put 2 handrails, and I'm making them myself out of metal. Well, I'm not making the metal, but they're just going to be 1.5-inch round metal tubes, basically, with a fitting on either side. So painted black. That was another decision. I got this metal and it's raw metal, and I was thinking, I should probably do galvanized, but I don't know if you've done any welding. I was going to have to weld the brackets on some of these things, and welding galvanized just releases these horribly toxic fumes.
It's toxic. Vaporizing zinc is not good for you.
No. So I'm in conversations with a guy, a metal finishing guy in Lexington. I'm hoping he can just dip. After I'm done welding, I'm going to see what it would cost to just have these things dipped after the fact. So we'll see.
I think you should just embrace the rust.
Yeah, and the other thing is just be super duper careful. I went to Sherwin-Williams. You got the best possible paint that they had, primer and paint, and we'll see what happens. So I might just go that route as well.
Do you
Speaking
have any powder coating companies by you?
I thought about that too, and that's my next. If this galvanized guy comes back, and it's a matter of how big their tanks are too. So if they don't have an 8-foot, if they're just a company that dips, smaller stuff and not have an 8-foot tank, I might go the powder coating route because I've heard that that's not really that expensive. So
yeah, we've priced it for a few projects with awnings over windows for sun shading and passive solar kind of designs, and I'm always surprised at how reasonable it comes back,
especially when you compare it to the average, maintenance-free deck rail, as you know, Jeff, it's friggin' expensive. $75 a foot for it or up. Yeah. So, that adds up fast. So if you can get some raw metal, cut it to size, slap a bracket, and have somebody powder coat it, it's, that's not bad.
I want to say two things before we turn this to Jeff's railing. So, like everybody else, I get these Harbor Freight emails, Mark, and one of their new products was a plate compactor for like $800. I think you should totally get one of those and run it over that gravel 1,000 times.
I do have one, actually. I've used it for hours and hours on this project. But what I didn't do, so I used it for the inside, but what I didn't do is I should have I just thought, after a couple of years, it'll be compacted because I didn't plan on building a patio out here for a couple of years. But I did some research recently. It can take like up to 8 years for, typically you do it in a foot light, a lift, and then you'd pack it and then do another lift, which is what I did for the gravel in the house. But, it can take a long time. So we'll see how long this goes. But you know what? Running that plate compactor, not that I would want to do it for 8 hours a day, but it's kind of fun.
You don't know. You don't have to think about it much, right? It's like
nope. Back and forth.
I forget what the other thing I was going to say, so never mind. Jeff, how's your railing going?
It's going well. Yeah, so all the cables in. I just need to tension it and trim it, and it's done.
It looks beautiful. You should be pleased.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And you said, I think you mentioned something about the wires. How did you, when I did mine, I actually put little tape around the wires that I think were going to fray and, and shove them through. And you said that, how did you handle the fraying situation?
Well, I got the little needle thing that slips over the end, and it's easy. A couple of them, it was hard to get into the needle, but once it was in,
the other good way to do, if you're cutting cable, is to have a cable cutter. It cuts them so much, with the rounded blade on it. It cuts them so much more cleaner than if just trying to take a snips or whatever.
Yeah, because I bought the prepared cables, so a lot of them were actually, looks like they were cut with a plasma cutter, so the ends were fused anyway. Except for occasionally there'd be one stray strand. A few of the longer ones had been cut, so those, as long as I put the little rubber cap on them when I unspooled them, because then they started to fray if I didn't.
So you didn't get any...
as you look at them, they start to unwind, right?
Yeah. And then you get that nice needle right under the fingernail. That always feels great.
So far, I've avoided that, but I still have to cut the excess cable off. So there's still time.
How do you do that? Do you have a plasma cutter?
No, I do not. I'd love to have a plasma cutter.
Does Harbor Freight make a plasma cutter?
Yeah,
they do, but it's still like $1,000.
Is it a single-use plasma cutter?
Right.
I hear that stuff's getting better and better. And of course, you can still buy garbage there. But, like every other company that makes tools, it starts out importing stuff. They start realizing that you can sell good stuff too, right?
Yeah.
If I remember right, Mike Gerton swears by their hammer drill, doesn't he?
Rotary hammer, yeah.
Rotary hammer,
See, for years.
On that, my old business partner bought one of those, and he burned it up on the first... Well... Yeah, on the first job, he drilled like 30 holes and that motor fried.
So we're at 50-50.
Right. Yeah.
But they also
speaking
have
of tools and money, so I don't know how you guys feel, but you have to. So do you have to buy? Is your company buying you a new laptop, or do you have to buy that? Is that your?
No, they're buying it.
Oh, that's good.
There was some negotiation that took place at the end of the day yesterday about which one I wanted versus which one they wanted to pay for.
Yeah,
and I lost.
I can spend hundreds of dollars on a tool and be happy about it. But if I have to buy a new laptop, which I should have probably a year ago, I just not something I get excited about.
Yeah, spending habits should be a future after show topic of things that you're okay with spending money on and things that just drive you crazy to even have to spend $5 on.
Yeah, new phones, new laptops. To me, that's like getting new tires for my truck. It's not something I'm jumping.
See, now new tires for a vehicle, I'm all about like, all right, which one's a little bit better and going to last longer, and I'll spend money on that. That doesn't bug me.
What were you saying earlier, Jeff?
Oh, just when you were talking about the Harbor Freight tools, it's just like most of their stuff, they've got a good, better, best kind of.
Mm-hmm. I see that, like, especially with the expensive stuff, the welders jump to mind. They...
I go there for special. I try not to get anything with motors, a bolt cutters or a lift or some type of, leverage type tool. If it's just a piece of metal that I don't have to plug in, I'm feeling pretty good about it.
I've only really bought one thing there, and that was a drywall lift, and it worked fine for me. Yeah. And then I sold it to Andy Engel, who used it for his project, and then I don't know who has it now, but
Was it red?
Something. Yeah. Do you have it?
I have the same one in my grain rate, but it's not your old one. It's the same one.
But that's the exact type of stuff I'm talking about. If it's got just metal parts that I can look at and say, oh yeah, that'll work just fine.
I can tell you, having used the real ones from the good manufacturers and this piece of junk, there is a difference. Does it matter enough for most people? Hard to say. But if you're using it every day,
you have to watch how you interact with the crank on it, because it will just fall straight down if you if you don't know what you're doing.
There's a handle on the wheel that'll ram into your forearm, if you're not paying attention. It's super awesome. So I heard from our friend Katie Hutchinson, who with her co-host Dawn Oliveira spoke with our book editor, Peter Chapman, and it's described as former book editor, but Peter's never going to stop doing work for the company, is my understanding. So he's still doing stuff for Taunton and has been instrumental in some of Taunton's most popular and influential books. So I would tell you all to have a listen to that. I'll put a link to it on the podcast page. It's a great conversation and a fun listen. So I encourage you all, if you're into Taunton content and have enjoyed Taunton's books, you'll want to listen to Peter's conversation because it's super cool. So we heard from our listeners, and it's always one of my favorite parts of the show. So thanks again, folks, for writing in. Greetings, FHB crew and fellow listeners. I'm writing about the topic of soul-bashing work, but before that, I want to mention the other thing. As an architect, I would love if FHB would offer continuing education courses. It seems like it would be a logical step for Fine Homebuilding, since the mission of Fine Homebuilding is essentially to teach. Anyway, on to the topic of... so I want to just say, Dan, that the continuing ed... you get continuing ed credits for Taunton e-learning modules. So pretty much anything you want to study will give you your continuing ed credits for your AIA requirements. So I think you should do that. And I'm going to say with some bias that it's better than most of the stuff out there that I've seen. I've seen some of the stuff that are put on by manufacturers for AIA credit, and some of it's pretty mediocre. But I will say that the stuff that we're doing is top notch right now.
I believe you can also use some of those videos for NARI and for their certified lead carpenter continuing education. I know that's what our lead carpenters here. They'll do a bunch of video stuff, watch a couple a day, watch one over lunch to make sure that they're staying up on their continuing ed.
Do you have do you hold any permits, Ian? Or not permits, but license for the company?
I do not. Currently, the owner holds them. I believe mine are still current from when I built my house. I did the licensing because I wasn't sure if the municipality was going to let me do it as a regular owner builder, and I also figured it would help me get it financed by a regular bank, which it did. So it did its job there.
So you can keep up with the classes? Because you got to do, 8 hours? Is that GC license? You got to do 8 hours?
12 hours every 2 years, I want to say, is the required continuing ed.
Yeah, I did. Minnesota was, I think, 8 hours a year. And that was before online classes when I was doing it. I enjoyed those classes. Because you could choose. Yeah, and they were fun, I thought.
And arguably very useful. I mean, that's why they do it, is they want you to keep up with the times, right? Yeah. Dan goes on to say, anyway, onto the topic of quote unquote soul bashing work, I want to say 3 things. First, I totally agree with the comment that the best thing to do is fire up some podcasts. I find that podcasts are a lot more engaging and distracting than music. They're also a great way to be in touch with the world and learn about interesting things that are going on. I'd love to hear if the co-hosts have any podcast recommendations. Anyone?
Oh, yeah. That's all I do. I probably listen to about 4 hours of podcasts a day. So... Yeah, but sadly, mine mostly, because I do this all day long, I'm at a computer. It's usually not building. It's usually, I'm kind of a history buff, so it's usually history or, interviews like the Tim Ferriss, interviews with interesting people and a couple health ones. Peter T is good, but I would say by and large, it's mostly history related stuff for me.
Do you indulge, Ian, Jeff?
I've started listening to the Prof G podcasts. He's a NYU professor and investment guy. He's got some pretty interesting money stuff. And then despite being an NYU professor and a New York Times writer, he's pretty down the middle of the road with his general beliefs. So I find him to be pretty interesting to listen to. And he has a few different kind of current event essay style podcasts that he does weekly that I enjoy.
Conversations with Tyler is probably one of my favorite. Tyler Cohen is I think he's at Mason. Oh, where is he? He's a professor, but he's just probably the smartest human being I've ever heard. And he interviews people anywhere from artists to politicians to economic. He's an econ guy, but yeah, his. I don't get too jealous of too many people or for other skills. That's not one of my faults, of my many faults, but I would love to have a photographic memory, and he obviously does, and wouldn't that be nice just to like read something once and be able to quote it 10 years later verbatim? That would just be awesome.
I'm guessing he prepares well ahead of his. He's not just recollecting that stuff, is my guess.
He does. No, absolutely, absolutely. But he still goes back. I mean, you would have to listen to him. He's just preposterously brilliant.
I would add, Patrick, that those two guys that trade off hosting the Pro Talk podcast are pretty good too.
Of course.
He says the second best thing to do is get in the right mindset. As a beginning DIYer, I always try and remember that the work is part of the learning experience. For a while now, I joke that instead of calling it do it yourself, they should call it do it twice. I pretty much every time do a project, I have to do it a second time to get it right. It might sound depressing, but it helps me remember that it's all part of the process of learning and practicing. Thirdly, I totally agree with the comment that the boring work is an excellent excuse to buy yourself some really good tools. As I see it, any tool that can reduce your time spent on grunt work is an excellent investment. I think my next buy will be a really good power sander with a good dust collector, less boring sanding and less cleanup. Another upside is that the platforms like Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp make it easier than ever to resell your tools if you no longer need them. Thanks, y'all. Love the show. Bye. So, Dan, sander is a great idea. I can tell you I used cheap sanders for years, and once you use a good one, it is life-changing. So I would totally...
I dropped my Festool one off a roof and into a pond, and it still works.
Really?
Yeah. It never missed a beat. I mean, that's...
Are you talking belt sander?
No, the palm sander. I was
I don't
sanding.
think Festool makes a belt sander, but maybe
I think
do.
they do, but in Europe, UL won't let them do it here. They've got a whole fleet of awesome tools that UL will not pass that we can't get here. And I think the belt sander is one of them, but I can attest to the longevity of that regular 6-inch basic random orbit sander. It, again, kills you to spend $400 on a sander, but I can't kill the thing.
And, running a 6-inch random orbit sander is punishing. You might as well make it easier on yourself and get more work done and enjoy it more, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Sanding is one of my all-time least favorite things to do. Whenever I build a project and I get to the sanding stage, I'm like, all right, I'm already looking to my next project. It's like,
it's like when I quit.
See, that's when you have to find a lumberyard that will run it through their time saver.
I've done that.
Sander for you, and then you have to take it really slow with the build so you don't screw up the finish and have to resand.
Right.
This comes from Paul in Wisconsin. Hi, podcast team. I've been listening to the podcast for years and have to say that your teasers for the after show are the most compelling I've heard in recent memory. Normally, I see right through these type of pitches and get too cynical right away, but your delivery is impeccable. I'm not sure if it's planned to be this way, but to me it seems to be just the perfect balance of enough teaser to get me interested, but not so salesy that it causes me to run in the opposite direction. That said, my budget for hobbyist building science / home building content is maxed out right now. I know that folks have asked about joint membership for GBA and FHB All Access, but those have been maintained separately. If Taunton ever offers a combined GBA FHB membership, I'd be interested in that. In the meantime, is there any chance I could use my GBA Prime membership as a way to access the FHB after shows? Thanks for considering, Paul in Wisconsin. Well, Paul, I will pitch your idea to the team on our staff meeting tomorrow. And I thought it a good idea, any combination of Taunton memberships should get a discount, right? I know there are folks in our sphere that have Fine Gardening and Fine Homebuilding and Fine Woodworking and Threads memberships and subscribe to the products. So I think you should get a break for subscribing to more than one. Does that seem reasonable?
It could be like Everything Taunton or something along those lines.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Paul, I think that smart companies listen to their customers, and I appreciate your suggestion. I think it's a very good one. He says, P.S., since I'm writing to you anyway, I want to share that the FHB podcast, along with the other usual suspects when it comes to online residential construction content, helped convince me to go for it and make a lot of envelope improvements in my own house. After a flooded basement caused me to discover a multitude of concealed sins in my family's home, I learned much more about building science than I'd ever planned. Since then, I've been peeling back layers of our late 80s Cape Cod to try and improve things as time and finances allow. I hesitate to call it a Cape Cod since it's from the late 80s. As you can imagine, it's much larger than a traditional Cape. The more knee walls, the merrier, right? So far, I've air sealed both the main attic and a small one-story attic connecting the main house to the garage, air sealed both attic access hatches, air sealed cantilevered bay windows on the first level. I'm waiting to finish my air sealing of the knee wall and air sealing of the small crawl space before I get another blower door test. My pre-work blower door score was around 5 air changes. I'm hoping to get it down under 2 with my improvements. I have CO2 monitoring connected to my little home automation system, and the levels are pretty close to the point where mechanical ventilation will be a good thing to add. Based on some very rough calculations, I think this also meet my ACH goal, but I will wait for the red door of truth before declaring victory. That is a great name for a blower door, am I right? Yeah.
Red door of truth, absolutely.
If you couldn't already tell from my running away from sales pitches, this is an essay which began as a postscript, I will confess and dispel any doubts. Yes, I am in fact another one of those engineer types. Keep up the great work on the podcast. I truly enjoy listening each week. Dan, thanks a lot. That was super. Could you have guessed he was an engineer?
I think he could have flown under the radar for a little bit. He wasn't as forceful about it as some engineers who write in.
Yeah.
I love the stuff he's improving on his house because I think you would all would agree that is definitely the things that need the most attention, right? Yep. Cantilevered windows, knee walls, attic hatches. These are things where you can make considerable improvements with relatively little work compared to, spray foaming your entire attic or what have you.
Yeah.
So this comes from a Tron player on GBA. What would be a good recommendation as far as using the top and bottom plate to stud ties as pictured? Occasional tornado warnings are issued, but these are not required in my area. The cost seems relatively small to add them. They may make air sealing slightly more difficult. Thanks. So can somebody help me describe what the heck he's talking about here?
So he's on the top plate, isn't he talking about what looks like a hurricane clip or hurricane strap, but made to wrap the side of the stud and make a metal connection to the double top plate? And then on the bottom, he's talking about something that has a sort of T shape to it to connect the bottom of the stud to the single bottom plate.
And we're trying to improve the load path here, right, for uplift and other wind acting upon the structure, right? But these are critical areas that can pull apart. Right. Do you think this is necessary, guys? Because no. Mark's shaking his head. Why, Mark?
Well, it depends. So a couple things that when I build a building, typically I like to have the plywood flush with the outside of the block. So, right there, you're going to have the plywood come down. I mean, the plywood, as long as the guys are, nailing that bottom plate, the plywood is going to act like one big giant hanger. That said, the problem that I see all the time, and when I'm at a job site or whatever, I kind of just peek to see what the guys are doing. And I see a lot of guys, they don't switch from the treated nails to when they're fastening bottom plates. So they got the walls down and they're fastening the top plates. Great. They hit the bottom plates and they're still using, untreated or just zinc coated nails.
You're into the mud still, you're saying. Am I interpreting that right?
Yes.
Do you think that matters? I've never switched nails there.
Why? I don't know why it wouldn't. I mean, if you're not supposed to, I mean, if it corrodes your fastener, you have no fastener left there. So,
but it's not going to get wet. Would be my argument.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always, and even when you're doing the plywood on the outside, the plywood on that bottom thing, you're going into. I mean, if your fastener is coming in contact with treated, it just seems silly not to use a fastener that's going to stand up to that.
Ian?
I think Mark has a good point. A lot of that treated material that gets used for mud sills, that stuff's pretty wet when you get into the middle of it, just from the pressure treating process. And When I did my house, I remember going to the local big box home center, and it actually had all of the nails were stamped for compliance with the pressure treated material. So I just used the same ones all the way
On
through.
everything, yeah. I mean, they are more
Jeff,
expensive. I mean, they're.
what do you think,
know,
Jeff? Does this make sense?
I never thought about it, but yeah, I think I don't know that you'd lose the nail, but I can definitely see that it would corrode.
But to
Well,
the
it wouldn't be
point
the
of
first time y'all call me a hack, so I'm expecting.
But to the point, I think if the plywood's going to hold the whole length of that board, it's not coming off as long as the sheathing crew is tagging it all along the bottom.
So here's what I'm going to say, and I see it a lot, and it drives me crazy. Is okay. So folks sheathe walls before they stand them, right? That makes a lot of sense. But they stop at the bottom plate, so that means there's this little strip of plywood that's holding that goes over the band joist, right? And there's no connection of load path there. That for that sheathing to work best, it should lap down to the mud sill, go up the wall, and connect the levels. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. And I think if you do that and build that way, I think this in most places would be complete overkill and probably a complication because somehow it's going to translate into lumps in either the sheathing or the drywall. Or, it's going to be hard to hide it.
If you could find a hanger, that sticks, maybe just an L bracket or whatever, and it makes you feel better and it's cheap, and it's not going to hurt anything unless it's on the surface of the wood where it's, it's causing drywall issues.
My
Tron player,
preferred method on some of these applications is to use I believe it's made by Simpson. It's kind of a U-shaped hanger that bolts to the side of the stud that you can then put threaded rod through. I think it's one of the options for holding a deck back to your floor framing. You can actually use
DTTZ. Yeah, deck tension
you
tie.
can use that to actually have on your first floor and second floor walls to pinch them together with the threaded rods. You're actually clamping them to the floor system. The house that we've started here at TDS, we're using those in several areas where we have very large window and door openings to help us with the braced wall panel assemblies that we need for those. I think they're also part of the prescriptive portal frame.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, do you have a photographic memory? How did you remember the numbers from that strap?
Mark, my memory is a very weird thing. So I can remember stupid stuff like that. I cannot explain why, but like Carol and I have forgotten our anniversary more times than we've remembered. And fortunately, it's both of us, But yeah, and like people's birthdays, I can never remember, even family members. It's very weird. I have to make up little songs to remember stuff. It's very.
We
weird.
had an event this weekend. It was like an ice cream fundraiser thing. And I bet you I asked my wife 17 times throughout the week, what time is that again? When are we leaving?
I think the key to having a photographic memory, Mark, is just to repeat it with a lot of confidence, and then no one will question you.
Yeah, exactly.
Tron player, I'm gonna make a pitch or a plug, for a Fine Homebuilding article that I'm working on that you should totally check out before you start building this house. And it's called the Fortified Home Program, and it's been developed by the Institute for Business and Home Safety. And it's a number of simple things that you can do to make your house more resilient, especially in wind events. And they're not complicated things. It's using deformed nails to secure your sheathing. It's using a little tighter spacing than would be customary. It's about taping your roof sheathing, so if you do get a breach of your roof covering, blowing off, the water's not going to pour into your house. It's about lapping the plywood like I was talking about earlier so it connects levels of the home. This stuff is not hard to do and not expensive. So, if you want your house to be more wind resistant, I would say you should totally look into those. And I will put a link to their homepage so you can check out the details that are pretty well understood and easy to do.
I think you make a
guys
great
familiar with
point
this?
with those suggestions because they all fit within the general vernacular of building. They're all regular stuff that tradespeople do all the time, and that's one of the downsides to a lot of these engineered solutions is they take you kind of outside of your normal day-to-day carpentry related tasks that now you're suddenly trying to figure out how to fit these two brackets together and are you using the right screws, and sometimes you have to use different screws for different parts of the bracket, and of course none of them have the same tip for running them in with your impact. So
Yeah.
I think of what you just suggested there is all standard operating procedure carpentry stuff.
Yeah,
I think
and
my tool belt right now has, I believe, 4 different bit holders in it with 4 different types of bits.
Yep.
that drives me crazy. It really does. Yeah. They should all be T25s. And one that really drives me nuts is when they're T20s and you load up your pals with them and you can't tell, and then you get to where you're going and try and put that
Yes.
green bit in there and it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
I can tell you can run in the 25s with a 20 bit sometimes.
Gotta get it on an angle the right way, follow it around as you're sinking it in.
This comes from Rodney. He says, "Hey, podcast, I'd like to enclose a 9x12 screen porch and make it part of our living area on the first floor of our house. The floor of the porch is a 3-inch thick slab on a stone foundation. The concrete floor is pitched 1/8 inch per foot to the exterior, and it's roughly 6 inches lower than the finished floor height inside. Once the space is enclosed, I want to open it up to the living area with a finished floor level with the rest of the interior. What's the right approach to framing the floor over the slab as well as adding a vapor retarder and insulation to this floor system?" So do you guys have any thoughts on this? Has this been a project you all have done? I've seen this done. I haven't done it myself.
It's a pretty common one that
Yeah.
we see in remodel homes here. We were actually just looking at one yesterday where it's pretty clear to the eye of a carpenter that this room that they want to add on to was a porch at one time. So that gets us thinking about like, well, what is that floor actually under there? To me, it depends a lot on how far down that floor is from the finished floor that you want to have be adjacent to it. But I think he's in the right frame of mind with some sort of vapor barrier, and then it just comes down to what type of insulation you want to use depending on your framing method.
I think
Yeah,
this is a good cut and cobble, right? At least for the bottom layer, because you need some kind of air barrier, right, between this framed floor and the concrete. What were you going to say, Mark?
So you're likely just going to be laying sleepers down, and then somehow insulating in between those sleepers and have vapor barrier. So you're throwing down a 10 mil poly, putting some sleepers down on top of that, and filling in. There's several different ways of insulating. A couple things I would think about is, is it going to be easier to run before you put that floor together? Should you be, fishing wires through before should you put fishing? I mean, maybe there's enough room to fish. Maybe you want to put a vent or something like that, or I don't know if there's going to be plumbing or something like that. But before you cover up that floor, you might want to take advantage of that space in between it to run any kind of utilities. And anytime you're dealing with the porch, to me, the biggest thing is, what's that porch sitting on? Does that have footings? I mean, are the footings capable to handle this extra load? Because sometimes you think your porch is stable, but it could be hinging every year. It could be going up and down every single year, and you would never know it really.
And porches are notorious for being underbuilt, right? They're often an afterthought. They are often converted from other applications, right? It's just like, yeah.
All the houses, the pre-war or the post-war housing boom in the inner ring suburbs around Minneapolis, every single one of those porches fallen off the house because they just, they did the basement. And then the footings, I think they just put a couple of rocks in the ground and then built the porch on top of it.
Pittsburgh's like that too, and sometimes they're just built on dirt. I mean, literally on the soil. Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing, and it's really not that hard to check. I mean, just take a shovel and dig down. I mean, if you can get under, if it's solid, filled up so if you can't access it, what's under that porch through the basement, then just dig down and on a corner
On
and
the
see
side.
what's underneath that thing. And they have and right now they have, it's such a nice, the helical piers. I mean, the price is coming down on them, the systems to support
So you're
those
saying if your
foundations.
foundation is inadequate, this is an easy fix. You bring in this little drilling rig and it runs these
Yeah.
pipes into the ground, and then you build from there.
I mean, it's not free, but it could be a lot cheaper than tearing down the whole thing and starting over.
Oh my gosh!
One of the
just getting
things that we
access,
try
right?
and one of the things that we try and do is save the roof of a porch and then build a new room underneath it. We found that the cost savings of that, especially if it has been re-roofed somewhat recently, saving that structure can really make that a much more palatable project from a cost perspective.
Yeah, and you don't have the huge hole in the envelope, right? That you would when you rip off the roof, right? You actually are keeping the house protected much more than if you rip that off.
Yeah, and then you can get your helical pier rig in there, and you can build it kind of like a deck at that point. If you really wanted to save money, do an insulated and sealed floor system and set it on helical piers. I believe Dan Colber uses that method quite a bit for additions that he does in Maine.
The article, and I'll link to it, is called Air Sealed and on Piers. And I don't think it was Dan's project, but we did that piece once. Or
Do you have?
Matt
Do you use piers? Do you use piers a lot at the
everywhere
company?
we can?
Really? So, are you using them typically for decks or for the main? I mean, what are you using them for?
Right now, mostly decks and screen porches, but we're starting to consider whether or not some of these tight neighborhood rear yard additions should be on those piers, as opposed to trying to get equipment back there to dig a frost wall foundation and get concrete back there. Some of these.
You guys own?
No, we have a subcontractor in the area that does it. The reason to go with one of the kind of retail style subcontractors is they will provide all of the engineering for you. So that way, once you go to get your certificate of occupancy, you have a stamped drawing with calculations that you just hand to your permitting and inspector, and you're done. You don't have to do anything more.
what's cool about that is you don't normally get that with a concrete foundation. Right. Am I right? You don't get values of what the soil bearing capacity is or the footer capacity. It's.
And the beauty of those things is it's real time. So if you're pouring a footing anywhere, and even if you go with a poker and test the soil or do these things, you're not testing. You could be hitting a really nasty spot and have no idea. With those things, they just keep going until it's going to work.
Yeah.
Just keep adding extensions on.
Yep. And have you had? I mean, these things have been around long enough now. I'm assuming it seems like there's more contractors doing it, because I know back in the day it was you could find somebody, but man, even on not a super busy period, there'd be a wait time to have this contractor come out and do it. But so for you, scheduling these piers has not been an issue.
Typically 2 weeks out. One of the subcontractors likes to do a drive-by and just check out the job, and they tend to have a pretty wide geographic range that they cover. I think one of our options is like Madison and Milwaukee, so that's about a 150-mile long range that this one guy covers. Another one is Madison and the western part of the state. So we're like the main municipality for him. So we tend to get a little bit quicker than with the guy that we're sharing with Milwaukee.
Can you give us a range, Ian, about how much per pier these things cost roughly?
1 to 2 is usually $400, and then I think your extensions are like $250 to $300 if you need to be 8 or 10 feet down, and then the price drops drastically the more of them that you have him do. I think by the time you get up to 5 or 6, you're down around $250, and then sometimes for a whole day's worth of work, they'll waive their trip charge, which is like $100 to $150. but
The
you're
other
ready to
huge
build immediately.
and
It's
the other
done.
thing is site disturbance. Like digging a
Yeah.
foundation is hugely disruptive. These things are
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
pretty
just tore
stealthy,
down,
right?
Or even access. I mean, renting a pump truck is $600-700, isn't it?
$950 to
Ooh.
$1,200, depending on the size of the pump truck.
You put the Kentucky discount in there, Mark, is my guess.
Kentucky price.
Yeah. Well, so it's a little bit different in the municipalities. I actually just was looking at our good friend and main listener, writer, and guy Dax concrete proposal for his cottage that he's building, and he was surprised at how low it was. And then I reminded him that the pump truck was a line item at the bottom, and you should multiply that by 3 and add it back into the total, and then it'll be a little bit more in line with what you were expecting.
Great question, right? This is a common thing people do, often badly, right?
Yeah.
This comes from.
I mean, it's mainly just keeping that thing stable. You want to make sure, because you're going to have drywall cracks every single year. You're going to have it's going to be a disaster.
I love your point to put the mechanicals on the floor before you close it up, because that is totally something I would have regretted after like putting the wax screw in the subfloor.
You
Right?
usually get pretty excited, It's like, because then you're seeing progress, or you're just going to town, and then it's like, oh, geez, I should have thought I had a little bit more on that one.
This comes from New Orleans Girl on the FHB forum. Hello, all. I'd like to remodel the kitchen in my newly purchased 60-year-old house. How much difficulty and expense is added when the homeowner wants to change the location of the sink, appliances, or cabinets? I already know that the galvanized pipes need to be replaced, and the terracotta/cast iron/ABS sewer pipes need to be replaced. Should this be done before the kitchen remodel or at the same time? Do I need 2 different companies, plumber and kitchen contractor? Ian, I think you're the best person to answer this. This is the work you guys do all the time, right?
Yeah, I think you need somebody who can design it for you and get it all drawn up and planned out. Anytime you're going to do anything more than a pull and replace for a kitchen, I think you want to have some design professionals involved. And I've found with our plumbing contractors that on that first site visit, as soon as they walk down in the basement, they're like, yeah, this is easy. We can move stuff wherever you want. It doesn't matter. Or they're going to look at it and say, you should really leave everything where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
it's
you
case by case, right? There are no rules about this.
Case.
Yeah.
If you wanted to, you could start with a plumber that maybe you've used in the past and just pitch it as, hey, I'm thinking about totally reorganizing the kitchen. Do you see anything down here that would be egregiously expensive if I, say, totally flipped all the plumbing roughs around in the design of a new kitchen or expanded into another space?
Yeah, that's great.
I'm going to say that
advice.
if you have a mixed match of waste lines, it is a really good idea to get that squared away at once, because you don't want that stuff to fail, especially after the kitchen is done. Am I right?
I found that
there's venting issues too. I mean, there's certain places where your vents have to be, and if you can't,
right.
I mean, you want when you put things in your water in your sink, you want it to go down the drain. But yeah, that's great advice, because it really is up to the plumbers. The electricians typically can get to wherever they need to go relatively easy. And a lot of times with the plumbers, it's going to be, first of all, is the flooring underneath a finished space, or is it just, that's going to decide a lot. And then the location of your HVAC, because your HVAC's, that's not, especially if you do have finished space underneath, getting around the HVAC's not easy, because that's, it's got to be certain places, and it's not easy to move as plumbing or especially electrical.
I've only been to New Orleans once or twice. Most of the housing, as I recall, the old stock was on crawl spaces, and the new stuff was all slab on grade. So it could make it pretty easy if it's on a crawl space, excepting someone has to go in that disgusting hole. But if it's on a slab, that makes it more challenging, of course.
Yeah, that's really where you need that key mechanical contractor as the plumber to guide you as to what's reasonably possible. You can do anything you want, really, if you're willing to pay for it. The other thing I would add to Mark's comment is you want to think about the distance that your hot water is traveling, and whether or not you should look at putting some kind of recirculation line in for your hot water, or even an on-demand hot water source under your sink.
Excellent advice.
And she asked, I think it was, she asked, do I need more than one contractor, plumber and kitchen contractor? A kitchen contractor is going to work with an electrician and a plumber.
Yep.
So
they're going to have,
if you have
relationships with the right kind of plumber, right? Like remodeling plumbing is way different than new construction, or they're going to know the person who can make this most affordable and work well.
Right.
And kitchens and bathrooms are expensive. So if you haven't fit any of these out, this isn't like throwing some drywall up in a TV room downstairs. There's every single contractor has to be involved. You do need electricians. You do sometimes need HVACs. There's going to be drywalls and painters and flooring guys and carpet. It takes every single sub, the same exact number of subs to build your house, basically, as it does to remodel a kitchen. So
unless you can secure yourself a spot on Mike Gerton's brother's dance card for like 2030 or something like that, when he might have some open time and he could just do everything for you.
Yeah. And then it all depends on your fixtures. When I was dealing with customers, like, well, how much to do the bathrooms? Like, well, you can install a $75 sink faucet or a $750 sink faucet,
or a $7,000 sink faucet, right?
$7,000, right?
But even more importantly than that, you can put in a few $1,000 shower enclosure, or you can put in a $50,000 totally tiled crazy shower with steam shower and all kinds of bells and whistles.
I got a weird question for you all, and there may be no answer, but how do you get folks to come up with a budget? Like, what can you really spend? And I think most folks think stuff is less expensive than it really ends up costing, and most folks have sticker shock when they see a proposal. How do you get people in the right mindset, Ian, that this is going to cost tens of thousands of dollars?
It's a long education process that starts with giving them really good information up front, and then continuing to drive that information home and having a process about how you go through your design work, and having those moments where you are putting it in front of them and going, we're really pretty sure this is what it's going to cost. Can you do that? Do you want to do that? Do you want to move forward with it? I think Sean Van Dyke had the piece of advice he gives contractors of asking clients, at what point of spending money does this project negatively impact your life? And I need to know that number so that we can make sure we don't get anywhere near it.
I would also add to that, the people always have in their mind, typically, especially in a bathroom or kitchens, they kind of have this one thing that they really want, whether it's a granite or it's a typical, a really fancy this or that, or a big fridge, walk-in pantry or something. They have one thing that probably stands out more than anything. And I know that even if everything is sometimes you're better off getting 75% of all those other things you want, and having that one thing really be what it is that you wanted, I think it goes a long way. It can help them.
Your $10,000 stone soaking tub.
Yes, you can have that, but then you can't also have the $3,000 faucet.
Then you need the plastic faucet, right?
You get a 5-gallon bucket
pail of water.
that you can bucket water into it with.
What was your big splurge, Mark, on your new house?
Probably the wood stove was the one thing that I spent more time and money on that I really, really wanted. I wanted the look. I wanted the functionality of it. But these things are installed. They're $10,000. They're $10,000 for the.
That's a lot of money,
for the whole,
right? For a normal person, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of normal people, our after show, for those of you who are All Access members, thanks very much for doing that. We're going to talk about contractor licensing, the pros and cons of that. I think it's going to be a fun conversation, and I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier in the show, but I hope you'll stay tuned, and I appreciate your support of the brand. And if you're not an All Access member to Fine Homebuilding, I hope you'll consider it. Maybe package it with a couple other Taunton products. I'll talk to the bosses about that idea. Anything to add, gents?
Nope.
All right. Well, we will be back in a little bit for All Access members. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the regular show. Thanks for Jeff, Mark, and Ian for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Excuse me. Please remember to send your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening. Stay tuned for the after show.